All right, it's the sixth discussion case, and you get to read a lot of your textbook in this discussion case. But it's actually not as much reading as it looks like because really there's two chapters that I want you to pay a lot of attention to, and then a few that I want you to pay a little bit of attention to and kind of skim and understand some different techniques. So we'll begin with this chapter on grounded theory, and this is just basically a chapter that walks you through kind of the history and the utilization of grounded theory. It's been covered in our lecture series. This gives you a little bit more detail. It also offers some perspective and some utilization tips for grounded theory. And all in all, it's just a useful counterpart to what we learned in the lectures. Where I really do want you to pay particular attention is in chapter 13, Analyzing Qualitative Data and Overview. So this chapter is a nice um, look at many of the different methods that are used for qualitative data analysis. And one of the things that I think you will notice right away is that a lot of different methods are highlighted here and talked about in very short summary form, suggesting to you, I hope, that there's a lot more depth and detail to go into to learn more about these different methods. This is a good introduction to them. But many of the methods that are talked about here are, if not courses on their own, could be entire PhD program type things that you would go through. And, for example, semiotics and hermeneutics are things that you would utilize in other fields, and you might specialize in those things because they have a long tradition, they've been around a long time, and they're very highly used in certain fields. Some of the techniques that are mentioned as well, like content analysis, conversation analysis, discourse analysis, are probably a little closer to what you have learned to do if you've been doing categorization or coding in your internship or in your professional life. And then narrative analysis is probably the most familiar way of talking about information because it's the one that hews probably the most closely to maybe a more journalistic kind of story or a book that is presenting a lot of research in a more narrative fashion. Metaphorical analysis kind of falls under that camp too, where we are looking to use metaphor to describe things. And you see that a lot in scientific fields where they're trying to make abstract concepts a little bit more concrete. The problem with metaphor, of course, is that it tends to break down if the metaphor isn't perfect, and metaphors rarely are perfect once you apply some scrutiny. So it's a good tool for helping to understand things, but it's not a great tool for actually providing depth and detail and nuance. So that's chapter 13. Chapter 14 and 15 and 16 talk about three of these different methods of analysis, and I want you to at least read through them in the first couple of sections and get a sense of what they are, because even if you don't necessarily want to use them in this discussion case, it's still good to have an idea of how they work. And the first of these is hermeneutics. Now, hermeneutics actually comes from biblical scholarship, believe it or not. And the reason for that is because during uh, the post-Roman era of church scholarship and into the Middle Ages, there was a real need to understand what the scriptures were telling people that was contextually correct and not just cherry picking out things that sounded nice and that fit the moment. And so hermeneutics was developed to try to understand meaning behind what was being said in the scriptures. And it extended, because a lot of scholarship in the seminaries extended to other fields as well. It eventually extended into liberal arts and social sciences as being a good method for trying to understand the meaning of other written things, whether it's literature, whether it is biographical accounts, whether it's verbal data that have been transcribed, all kinds of things. So hermeneutics is a really useful tool for looking primarily at written data. Semiotics is a little bit more confusing. First of all, the word is unfamiliar. And then the idea that it is the approach of analyzing and interpreting qualitative data through signs and symbols and understanding their meaning gets really needlessly abstract because signs and symbols, as it says here, can be studied not only in language, both written and spoken forms, but also rituals, culture, images, and art. In fact, anything that can be read as text. So semiotics can really go wild because you can even get into nonverbal communication, all kinds of things like that. And generally, what you're trying to do with semiotics is understand meaning behind how we are communicating with one another. And it is important to be able to recognize that there's a lot more to how we communicate than just what we say or what we hear. We see a lot, we interpret a lot from cues around us. There are many other things in our culture that shape us. I mean, it even goes talking about mythology and things like that. So the importance of objects around us, just all kinds of things. So semiotics, again, I think reading at least the first few pages of this chapter and getting a sense of what it's about, it'll help you to understand how it could be applied. And then we have narrative analysis. Now, again, narrative analysis is probably a little bit more familiar um, in terms of its application than other forms of qualitative analysis, because it's about taking all of the data that you have and kind of compiling it into a story. And if you listen to narrative style podcasts, or if you have heard audiobooks where they're taking a lot of interviews and compiling them into some sort of narrative or things like that, it really does lend itself well to that style of sharing information, kind of finding a through line and telling a story and helping people to connect. And I've listened to This American Life and Radiolab and other shows like that, and I can remember very complex but specifically told stories with a lot of detail, because they used a form of narrative analysis in order to take together all the different ideas that they had and to put them into something that was memorable. And researchers can do that as well. The problem with narrative analysis is that it tends to be very interpretive, and it also you have to have the right kind of data in order to be able to do it well. And a lot of times, if it's done poorly, it winds up leaving more questions than it does answering anything. So narrative analysis is a really useful tool. Read up on it, understand what it is. But again, I would just read the first few pages of this chapter unless you're really interested in learning more. This is a good reference for you. So moving on. So then we have Coding as a Long Walk in the Woods. Now, I actually like this article a lot. This comes from QRCA Views, which is a magazine for the Qualitative Research Consultants Association, or QRCA. And it's a short one, but it's talking about coding in a metaphorical way, and talking about how when we are thinking about how to analyze our qualitative data, that we can think about it as being analogous to either hiking on a trail or taking a walk in the woods and trying to figure out the pace and the amount of depth and detail that we want to go into. And one of the things that I think it really encourages is to try to find out how to really approach a data set. You need to take time to explore it and take time to think about it, and not be in a hurry to get right to your insights, but instead to really get an understanding of what you have. And it's just that it's a well-written, contemplative piece. It gives a little bit of technique, but it's a good introduction to what we're going to be talking about next, which is the first chapter of this book called The Coding Manual for Qualitative Researchers. Now, this next chapter, this is by Dr. Johnny Saldana. This is a book that you can get that has a lot more depth and detail than what we're sharing here. But this manual, like this first chapter, is just really helpful for understanding the basics of coding. So I think what you'll find here is that there is definitely some overlap with things that you've already read and things that you've already learned about. But when you get down to this page right here, what is a code? You'll notice right away, by the way, there's 31 pages in this document. You want to start, you can maybe skip a little bit of that preamble, but you want to start around right here and try to understand, what is he talking about in terms of coding? How is he presenting it in terms of a process? What ideas is he offering in terms of how coding can be done? And are there different ways in which we can look at coding that are maybe contrary to the methods that we have learned through our internships or through our own application, that can help us to be better at coding data? So this is just a supremely readable but very thorough chapter that kind of goes through a lot of those topics. And if you're wondering how to take different types of data and code them in a manner that is helpful for qualitative research, this manual really has you covered. And again, if you like this, and I recommend this book. It's really good. You can order a copy of the book and have the whole thing. And there's a lot more to learn from that article. So enjoy it. Again, I think you'll find it's very readable. It is not written in a real scholarly way, although it does cite a lot of scholars. It's very practical. So now we'll talk about our case study of the week, which is extended self and possessions in the workplace. And you'll notice Russell Belk was one of the authors here. Russell Belk's one of the qualitative researchers for whom we've read a lot of articles this year. And this is an ethnographic piece that's talking about people having things to decorate their offices and what that says about them and what that means about them. And the idea here is to kind of explore when we take things into our workspace, are we doing so just because we feel a need to decorate, or is it because these things might be able to help us to establish our identity and share who we are with other people? And I think back to the show Portlandia. There's a sketch on there, and if you have never seen Portlandia, you should definitely watch it. It's a great show. But there's a guy who hires a service where they come and they bring in Japanese toys to put on his desk to make him seem more interesting to other people, and they assemble this weird collection of Japanese toys, and he has no idea what any of them are, and somebody walks up and asks him a question about one, and he can't answer it, but that's still enough for the person to go, hey, you want to go to lunch? So just having things in your office on your desk space can signal to other people that you are an interesting person. And, I often get comments about the Legos that are right behind me here in my home office, and I have Legos in my other office as well. But those are an interesting facet of who I am. I enjoy building Legos and I enjoy talking about Legos. So if someone else is also interested in those or appreciates the scale or the magnitude of what is behind me there, we can strike up a conversation and they can learn a little bit more about me and my identity. And it gives us an opportunity to relate as people rather than just as colleagues or coworkers. So that is what this article is talking about, and it's really interesting as you look through it, because after you get past the literature review at the beginning, where it's a little bit more academic, and you kind of get into past the research method and down into these are the people that they actually interviewed, and you can see that they're varied ages, they're varied tenure with the organization, varied work experiences, varied departments, but you can kind of learn that there are some findings that extend here to all of these people that talk about how they identify themselves, how they make other people know who they are and how they exist as individuals. And, like this person has an Ansel Adams print, and this person has pictures of their dream boat. So you can get an idea of what they're working for. And this person has a Pez collection, which is a pretty small Pez collection, but I can imagine that every time there's a work-related giving, or anytime they want to recognize this person, especially, they probably give her a Pez dispenser, and that leads to other extensions of her identity. So this is a really fun piece, and the idea here that as they talk about in the conclusion, that we are blending our home lives and our work lives, and that the things that we might use to decorate our homes begin to kind of spill over into our offices. And there are industries that are resistant. Banks, the military, fast food outlets, and other businesses like that have resisted those trends because they have extremely professional environments or extremely cookie cutter environments where they want people to not be individuals. But then you have places like hospitals, universities, and supermarkets where those kind of displays are more personal and able to tell you a lot more about the people who are serving you there. So there's really some interesting stuff here. And I think one of the things that they mention in the conclusions as well, it says we have derisive expressions like get a life for those who fail to reveal some of their extended self in the workplace. In other words, we have a desire to see people be individuals. So read through this. This is an interesting one, and I think it will help you with your case study as well. I finally want to mention, again, I'm not going to go into detail on all of these pieces that are mostly from Quirks, because there's just they're readable. I don't need to really spend a lot of time talking about them. But what they do is they offer you different applications of how qualitative research might be used down the road, or how other methods are breathing life into it. And most of these articles are from within the last 10 years, and they talk about different ways that you can combine things. But I think that you will find A, they're really readable, so I don't need to spend a lot of time talking about them. But B, as you're using them in your study, you really need to just kind of skim them all and then pick the few that you find really useful or insightful and use that for your case study. But this is a good collection of things to look at if you're trying to figure out how you can marry qual to quant, how you can use qual in ways that go beyond what we've learned in this class, how you can maybe figure out how to take specific quantitative methods like conjoint analysis and marry that to qual. And conjoint is its own thing. I mean, you probably won't learn it in our MMR program, but it is a very, in any level of detail anyway, but it is a very good method for looking at product packaging and features and things like that. Even neuromarketing. And neuromarketing is kind of one of those things that was a buzzword a few years ago that's kind of fallen out of favor. That's mentioned here. User experience or UX is mentioned here. There's just all kinds of opportunities here to learn about where qualitative research can go. And I'm going to leave it to you to explore that on your own. So I hope you've enjoyed all of these case studies, and I've been happy to provide these reviews for you. This is a lot of depth and detail that you're being asked to read about, but that's graduate school, what can I say? And the good news is you now have a foundation, a treasure trove of articles that you'll be able to reference later on in your career, and you'll also know where to find more like them if you need to look for them down the road. Of course, any way I can ever be a resource to you, you're always welcome to ask me, and I'll be happy to help you find things if you need some newer pieces or you need to update your understanding. But in the meantime, enjoy, happy reading.